Hey, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of the SOPP, or Southern Oregon Progressive Podcast. I'm Kevin Bell, and as always, I'm joined with my co host, Betsy Cunningham. We have our usual guests, Zach and John, if you guys would like to introduce yourselves really quick.
Sure. Hello. I'm Zach Whitworth. I'm an historian in training, PhD student at the University of Oregon, born and raised in Roseburg, and I'm also affiliated with the Institute for Social Ecology. Always happy to be here.
It's always a pleasure to have you with us, Zach.
Yeah, I'm John Hunter. I'm with the Community Rights Douglas County and the Oregon Community Rights Network.
And they're really more than just, guests because they're here all the time. And sometimes we wrangle them into doing a program or two. So I really appreciate the fact that you guys are hanging in here. And I was looking at it, it's been about 10 months that we've been doing this. So, all right, anybody else want to introduce yourselves?
I'll introduce myself. I'm Frances Etherington. I do volunteer work for several environmental organizations, mainly Cascadia Wildlands and Umpqua Watersheds. And so that's my focus.
Hi, everybody. My name is Lori Wick, and I also volunteer at NAMI, National Alliance for Mental Illness, and as family-to-family facilitator and running for Douglas County Commissioner. So, Lori Wick, light the way.
Good job.
Anyone else?
Okay, so my name is Ruth Smith. I am the Ward 4 City Councilor for the City of Roseburg, and I represent the Southeast Roseburg neighborhood. My passion has been around food security and trying to make sure that our food desert is addressed, but I'm also very active in the homelessness situations that we've got going on and trying to advocate for an urban campground.
And Bill and Dane wrote Bill and Dane. Is that all you want?
Dane Zahner, him, and just a community advocate about homelessness, food resources, anything to help people and be a good human.
Bill Romo, Dane's husband, and I'm here because Betsy had asked me to say something a little later. So
Thank you. Thanks for being here, Bill. It's hard twisting your arm.
Hi, I'm Tina Dabowski. I recently started Umpqua Valley Pride for this year with a co-director, Christina Hilliard. And most people around town know me for doing security and de-escalation and training on that with Pride and elsewhere. And I use she, they pronouns.
Awesome. Is there anybody else who'd like to introduce themselves before we start on? I really thank you all for coming in tonight. This is one of our bigger crowds, and it's for a good reason. You know what I mean? Tonight we're going to be talking about the city council meeting and what Melissa Bird brought to light. Thank her for her efforts. Is ICE has been looking for facilities in Roseburg, Douglas County area. Betsy, do you have anything you'd like to start on with this meeting too?
Yeah, I just our kind of accelerated access happened Monday, right? When I got an email from and many people did, from Melissa Bird, who is running against Val Hoyle for the nomination, the Democratic Party nation nomination in Congressional District 4. And some other people had gotten that and started working on it. And then we just started pushing out. Somebody suggested going to the Roseburg City Council meeting that happened to be that night. And so the idea kind of moving towards us doing this and me doing more research was because we really didn't know a whole lot of information about what's happening. And even since the last time I talked with Kevin, what has happened is the agency that deals with solicitation RFPs, which they call our request for proposals under the federal government, like grant or contract awards. There's a preliminary step called request for for interest, which means give us some kind of preliminary stuff going on to tell. So we're going to make an assessment of whether we're even going to let you submit a grant application. And so I think that we knew that early on in the week, but not until I started doing research that I see the reality of what this means. One, I think there were some people who, showed up, a good number of people showed up Monday night. I was not at the city council meeting. And I did watch part of it, and Lori was there. And I don't even know that the city council was aware that this was happening or had paid much attention. And if folks who, were there want to talk a bit about that, please do. But later in the week, they made a statement that they, weren't going to make a statement because they don't have jurisdiction over that. And we can talk about that a little bit later. But the research I did, and after this is done, I'm going to upload a sheet with a bunch of links and information. And if the links don't go on the YouTube, they'll be on our Facebook page. But what I found out is this request for information is based on a request for a facility for 300 employees. So this is what it says in the government's actual initial request for information. So the kinds of things I think that all of us might have an issue and kind of concern, because I mean, does anybody in this room really trust the federal government to tell us the truth about anything? So, I think that we're highly suspicious. And, we have kind of we haven't really totally ignored, because, folks in this room have, worked somewhat on trying to deal with the issue of kind of the imminent threat of ICE, in our community, but it was kind of easy to ignore when they weren't showing a presence. I think but the fact that they're here, and keep in mind, there's only two places the DHS has, and I mean, the Department of Homeland Security has requested this in numerous communities in the country. But in Oregon, the only two requests went to Portland and to Roseburg. And so, and the other thing is that I don't, if people are aware, there's an ICE office facility in Eugene. Is that right, Zach? I believe it's in the federal courthouse or near the federal courthouse. And there's also one in Medford, because there's a federal courthouse in Medford. So if we're looking at, so this, I don't like to jump into conspiracy theories, but this kind of information, I think any of us should take pause at, and really trying to figure out what they're doing. Why did they pick Roseburg? I mean, I think we could all probably speculate on that. But what is supposed to happen? The other thing is somewhat suspicious, as the notification for this from the U.S. Immigration and Custom Enforcement, its Office of Asset and Facilities Management, and the request for information came out on March 20th. So that was week before last, right? And it is due Tuesday. So if you are looking at planning or even this, how come there's this rush? And into this notification process. And the notification basically says if you can't meet this, the standards that we set out, one of which is the ability to deal with 300 employees, then they don't want to hear from you at all. So if they get enough takers, or they get takers, they might go ahead and pursue that. And that kind of information, if we want to follow up with what's going to happen here, we need to probably be tracking that. I do want to mention that, Rural Organizing Project, who we've worked with, Community Rights have worked with, we've had their organizers on the show. And I actually did reach out to, what's her name? Uh,
Stephanie?
yeah,
Yeah.
Stephanie Hunter. Just your last name came to my mind.
Yes.
Stephanie Hunter, and she did actually respond, even though it's a Sunday. And they do have a whole program on particularly the state law that was passed by the legislature in 2021 that requires even our law enforcement. It solidifies what they call it, the Sanctuary Act. And so there's some protections and there's some real questions whether the Douglas County Sheriff's Office is actually, according to the information that ROP has on their website, there's some issues of them not following the law that went into effect in 2021 in the state of Oregon. And it also raises the question, are law enforcement also in the city law enforcement, have they updated their policies? And so I think that at some point, if we want to pursue this stuff, having ROP come and talk to us. I know that Stephanie brought the issue up a little bit about what the resources, but honestly, at that time, there wasn't seemed to be such an immediate threat to this going on. So I didn't pay as close attention as I should have. And so, uh, this will probably go pretty fast. The request for info or interest also says it's only for a year, and that just made me question what is going on. And there's also some real concern in various groups that deal with this, have been dealing with this issue, is the number of warehouse facilities, because that ICE has been doing, and how quickly, and even there was an Oregonian had an article, press release from Jeff Merkley recently, where he basically said he doesn't trust them, and they misrepresent stuff. And so, he opposes it. So anybody have any questions, comments, want to put their 2 cents in? It's kind of the.
Well, and you touched on some stuff that I was going to bring up that came up from the comments. Lori was just referencing what you talked about, how Senator Merkley did not trust the ICE representatives to build new facilities. And Dane also mentioned that it would be a good question for Tobias Reed, which is going to be in Douglas County on Tuesday. Speak of the devil, his hand is up, Dane, if you want to unmute yourself.
Yeah, I decide that would be a great question for the Attorney General. Is like, if your county says they're not going to abide by the sanctuary laws in Oregon, since that's our law, what can we do to make them realize that they don't have a choice? I mean, he's our Attorney General. Couldn't he help support that? I mean, that would be a great question for somebody.
Yeah, it would be. And yes, actually, he could raise that issue. It's a, it's a consideration. And when you look at the ROP stuff, and I will put a link to where that is on the ROP page in the description, and I'll send it out to folks if they want me to just email the list of stuff. I can do that too. But yeah, what role can they play? And I do want to say that the city of Roseburg may not have the ability to stop this from happening if it's within the city of Roseburg and a private business person wants to do that. But they certainly can take a stand against it, because when this was happening in Newport, the mayor actually came out against, the efforts that ICE was trying to inflict there.
And I just want to say that although I wasn't able to make it to the the Roseburg town hall or city council meeting, my bad, where I did watch the live afterwards, and then there was somebody who came up who used to be a previous city employee who did exactly who brought that up. There are maybe limited aspects that the city can actually go down this, but there's stands that they can take. There are actual avenues that they can say that we don't want this in our community. You know what I mean?
Yeah, they can have an opinion even if they really can't, make a vote to stop it. And there is speculation about whether this is just a red herring, just to see how conservative we are. My thought about why would they pick here, I-5 is an obvious thing, right? That makes it obvious to me. But is it because of the political climate here? they thought that it would be, an easy place to do it. So I don't know. So one of the problems that is probably also on people's mind is this transparency issue, that it's a problem. They give out information that isn't even really that clear. And I don't know that I saw anything that was formally given to anybody. I don't know. Was the city given, notification that they were interested in doing that?
No.
Yeah, I was just about to say, I see Ruth down there, and do you have any insights of what actually
No.
happened?
My understanding, so I wasn't at the meeting on Monday either. I've been really, really sick. And so um I I missed this last meeting, but my understanding is they all got notice according to the notifications that I got, that they all got notice at the same time you did, because they didn't try to do an agenda setting thing. They came in and spoke under the and notified the city at the same time, that the everybody got to talk about it in the community um, portion where everybody gets to speak up. But one of the reasons that some of the things that I'm thinking about is, when they were talking about over at Newport, there was a piece that they were saying because of the airport, they were actually trying to get hangars or something like that on the Newport airport. That's against federal law, so they can't do that. But we do have an airport, so that would be one of the reasons why people would want they would be able to fly people out, and they'd be able to charter planes and fly people out. The other thing, something that we might want to look at is how many, if any of the hotels have been contacted to see if they could um, rent that many rooms. Because if you're saying 300, I don't think we have any hotels in the area that would accommodate that many um, folks at one time. So it would have to be a couple different hotels. And so then I would think that we could encourage them not to do it.
Well, and
So
I think it's very surprising that, just like you said, that the Roseburg City Council, where's the transparency? They didn't know until citizens had brought this up. You know what I mean?
right.
So this just completely seems like, they probably can, in all honesty, and are trying to overstep the Roseburg City Council, because the less, publicity, the better. Dane, you've had your hand up for a second. I'm sorry to.
Well, my question's for Ruth. I know, like, when you talk to like our state representatives, our state senators, our federal level, they have a log, and every phone call, every email is logged, and they
Right.
follow up to that. Does the city have anything like that where we could, like, we had 2,000 people out there last night. I think the petition's
Right.
great, but we need
Yeah.
2,000 phone calls, 2,000 emails, 2,000 letters to the city of Roseburg,
Correct.
so that they realize that there's a
Yeah.
lot of people that don't want this.
And just to let you know that if it's a form letter, they will capture the form letters. They'll send one in, but they'll keep hundreds of them coming into our boxes. So that's something that we've experienced here recently, like when we had the Southeast Roseburg, when they were looking at putting a homeless camp down at the Redaway. We got hit with numerous letters that were all form letters. So the algorithm or whatever ends up capturing those and putting them like into a spam folder. So we have to be careful. So if you want them to talk to our city council, then they need to do their own letter and their own communication to the city council, so that it doesn't end up getting into a spam folder that's captured.
Well, and speaking of the 2,000 people who were on the streets, in
Mhm.
Roseburg the other day. The city hall was packed last Friday.
Yeah.
Lori, I think you actually got to get up and speak about the ice facility. Can you tell us how it was over in the how it was there?
Yeah, they allowed 10 people to speak, and instead of it being at the end of the meeting, I usually think observed that it was towards the end, but they put it more towards the middle this time. I don't
Mhm.
know if that's newer. But so 10 of us got to speak, and we got 3 minutes each. I tried to speak to something that was different than what other people already talked about. So I just, reiterated what other people talked about. Yes, I agree with that. And then I just spoke to how much money is being invested in them, that it's more money than even the federal
Right.
penal system and military, and that what they look like in their military garb compared to when before this administration, they did not look like that. And just that we didn't want them here, and that is concerning. And so just to speak like that, and then one other person, there was one of the 10 people that spoke to something else, and she brought up a really good points about concerns with conflict of interest of somebody on the homeless commission. I have concerns also. I brought up that, and somebody asked me afterwards, like, do you know something? Well, I don't know anything, but I have concerns because I read a newspaper article, and I also brought this up, that there was this person from another town that reached out to the federal facilities, and to invite like a federal representation, ICE or whatever, to their community. And I think it was somebody like on a commission. They were a commissioner, and then the rest of the commissioners put out that they didn't want them. So they found him out, and then they said that's doesn't represent us and what we want. And so I had curiosities of, like, is there a way we can find out, do we have representation that might have reached out to the ICE and said we would like you to consider us to be here? And would FOIA cover that? Like, I know it can be expensive sometimes for people to gather that confidential or that communication. So would we just put, like, if I went to the city council or to the commissioners, like, and put in a request, did somebody communicate with federal representation about inviting ICE here? Would that cover the inquiry about, was there somebody from leadership in our county trying to communicate with ICE?
Yeah, you can it's not FOIA here. It's the public records law.
Okay.
The FOIA is the Freedom of Information Act, which is the federal law. And yeah, you can do a public records request. And if you did it if you do that from the city of Roseburg, there's a certain amount that they would just, give you the information. And I don't know that the city of Roseburg would be problematic if you wanted it from them. The county commissioners, they just think everybody's a fight. So, they may try if you ask them, but I want to reiterate that this current ICE, this is all a manufacture from the Patriot Act, the USA Patriot Act after 9/11. And, some of us were very active in that here. And one of the things we did back then is write freedom public records requests of the county and the state and the cities to see if they had any communication with federal jurisdictions, because they were trying to basically deputize, right? There was this whole movement to kind of deputize all of law enforcement within a state or county city level for to work that way with the federal government. And DHS came out of that, and ICE went to ICE and it used to be the Immigration and Naturalization Service, INS. And they were, far more user friendly. But under the Patriot Act, that was just one under the divisions of DHS that split them away, which when I was thinking about it and remembering this, because I actually used to work for Centro de la Raza in Long Beach, California, helping with immigration issues decades ago. Under INS and even the Simpson-Mazzoli, which was the legalization process that was a lot of people who were here for 10 years in the 80s. And it was a much different system than you see this thuggery that happens now with ICE. And I don't know how much, it seems that though that they weren't as bad until this administration. And, we could find out if there's communication, but to what end, right? That is what I would ask, particularly if there is a fight about whether we get it. I think that given the time frame, if we're going to do something about this and try to make a big thing about it, we would probably want to just focus on saying we don't want it here, period. But they said I was looking through the document about the request and it said even shared facilities. But does anybody here know of a facility that's big enough to share 300 spaces for office personnel?
Well,
Okay.
I've been thinking of the old Forest Service building there on Edenbauer, and that's probably federal government, maybe land too, maybe. So I think that could hold an awful lot of it. It had a lot of office space before for the Forest Service and the wildlife services. I think they could hold an awful lot in there. It's a pretty good sized building, and it's just right off I-5, and it's across I-5 from the Roseburg Airport.
Yeah.
100%. That was what I was thinking, was how much federal property they have here that they could house people in.
They're not requesting federal property. This is a request for information for a landlord. I mean, this is basically asking a landlord, where do you have space? Or another entity to provide it. Because in theory, because I was trying to think when they had the INS officer here, I'm not sure that he wasn't stationed in Eugene, but there was office space maybe in the county building. And this is under the INS system in the 1990s. So
But was saying what to lend credence to what John and Kat are saying. I haven't seen any activity when I drive by the old Forest Service building. And has anybody heard of anything like that? It is a likely choice. But at this point, there's just so not enough in Douglas County already. You know what I mean?
So is it just a fishing expedition or, to just test the waters? I mean, is it even really practically something that could come true?
Well, and I think that in itself has a lot of merit. Is it just a fishing expedition? Is it just some overall arching like olive branch to keep the conservatives in our local area appeased? Just like you're saying, we have the demographics. Why not rally up the wolves?
No. This is definitely serious. In the last few months, Trump has had his eyes on more than just Portland. I think it was about a month or so ago. There was a large demonstration in the night at the ICE facility in the DHS facility in Eugene. And there was a window that was smashed during that. Of course, the University of Oregon's Daily Emerald and others have footage that it was smashed from the inside by ICE officers themselves. So that led to Trump, I don't know, I don't even know what to call it, tweeting on his Truth Social account that Eugene is next. But bigger picture than that, the sites have been on the entire state of Oregon, in the same way that Minnesota was not just was not just an issue of an invasion of Minneapolis. Rural Minnesota was even subject, still is subject to ice incursion. The question of why Roseburg, I think is, I think there are a few reasons why. One of which is the aim of ice incursions anywhere in the United States right now is for total occupations of entire states. Oregon has long been a thorn in the side of the Trump regime. That's been known. The aim on that front is to capture the entire state, to place it in conditions of effectively a kind of military occupation, even though DHS is not a military force, which I can talk more about. The other reason why I would see Roseburg in particular is targeted is not just because there is a presumable base of support among the population in the area, but because it is vulnerable, because we don't have the kinds of civic institutions that can actually stand a chance in a fight against the federal government. We are also economically very vulnerable to this. And there's an argument that could easily be made by proponents of this is it'll bring jobs to the area. And somebody might readily accept that because, we do.
Because we're desperate.
Desperation, yeah. Economic hardship, which Roseburg is no stranger to for decades. That uniquely makes us vulnerable. But there's also an historical aspect to this. On the side of there's a presumably welcoming population in the area from the view of some of the federal administration. We're an old Klan town. So of course, it's like a no-brainer to set up shop here. There's an understanding that there is historical support in Southern Oregon. And really, like in the case of the Medford facility, as I've seen, there's not a lot of resistance happening down there. There are people getting trained in the Rogue Valley for sure to respond to ice appearances on farms in the valley. But you're not going to see it's like a demonstration, for example, outside of the facility in Medford of more than like a dozen people. I mean, it's nothing like what's cropping up in Portland and Eugene. Similarly, very vulnerable. And the problem of the weak civil society, that side of this has also to do with something that I've talked about quite a bit on here in terms of municipalism, the kinds of political institutions that we currently have, and what we might instead have if we work for it. Presently, the political forms that we have, our city council systems, our county commissions and such, are not they're not forms of popular control of our city and county. The people of the city of Roseburg do not control the city. A handful of people, this is not making any judgments, I'm just describing. A handful of people been granted power to make decisions, and nobody else does. And we also fall under the auspices of state law that we, to keep in line with the state law, we can't violate. And that means that a single business owner, a single landlord can endanger the whole community because the people of this community don't control this community. An argument for local control in a certain sense. But that's why I say that we have a weak civil society, and we don't have a clear apparatus at the moment to properly resist this. And that means it also doesn't matter what locals want. In this case, we could say, well, we could call as many politicians as we want. We could petition to the federal government, or we could write to Senator Merkley or somebody else and say, we don't want this. At the end of the day, that doesn't matter. The federal government still has jurisdiction over us, and it has the violence to back it up. I think that this should be a wake-up call for everybody in the area that there's not an easy political solution to this other than rethinking what local politics is going to have to be. Like our very institutions, because we don't have institutions that are capable of effectively fighting this at the moment. It certainly was not the case in Minnesota. Like we could do the kinds of nitpicky work of like pulling apart pieces of legislation that exist, pointing to the law and such. That does not matter when the threat is the invasion of a paramilitary force, which operates outside of normal bounds of law. You can't fight that through mere law. I think it for one thing, I think it's going to require Roseburg City Council delegating its power to broader swaths of the whole population of the city of Roseburg. But even that is also a tough thing to do because we have a population, a significant amount of our population that might, arguably be favorable to this move.
And that's actually my experience on the Nextdoor site when I posted about what we were doing tonight. Most of them, people who liked it really didn't make a comment, but those who didn't, did. And, even one argument was because of all the senior citizens, they'll feel safer. And it's like, people don't even think it's immigration, right? So exactly who are those immigrants that you're going to protect the old people from? So it's nonsense. I want to have Bill, kind of share of experiences, because one of the reasons I twisted his arm is after him talking about the way that he is concerned about his own safety, right? And I think that because we're so wide in this community, if we don't have friends who, are someone who may be victimized by this, or even family members, one of my son-in-laws is half Mexican, and doesn't particularly look Mexican. And, he kind of just ignores it, right? But the reality is we see that, is crazy. So Bill, can we put you on the spot and you want to tell us whatever you want to tell us?
Yeah. This is first off, I'm Hispanic. I'm probably a light colored Hispanic as it would go, except during the summer. During the summer, I get very dark very quickly. But with the political climate and everything being targeted towards brown people, if I go anywhere, this is the hat I have to wear, a baseball cap. Because it basically, since I grew my beard, it makes it easier to blend. But it's not my hat of choice. My hat of choice is a knit cap. But since I grew my beard, if I put on a knit cap I look Turkish, Saudi Arabian. I pick up more of that look that I might as well be wearing a turban on my head. And because of the political climate surrounding them and Hispanics and just ICE in general, you know, I try not to go anywhere where I'm going to be by myself. But I definitely will not wear a knit cap in public now. So I've had to alter how I do things, and I'm going to be 70 years old. I've never had to worry about it. I'm gay in Roseburg. I have to worry about this more than I worry about being gay. Yeah. So definitely anything we can do to stop ICE from putting in an office building or anything here locally and reinforcing that feeling would be awesome. So that's kind of all I have to say.
Thank you, Bill.
Sure.
And I work at the Democratic Party twice a month, and starting about 8 months ago, there was a Mexican. Was born and raised in Mexico, but has lived here for several decades, at least three, maybe more, and is a U.S. citizen. And he came in because of and he's dark, and he has an accent. He has a Spanish accent. He works for a local mill, and has for decades. And he was talking about not only him, he said he's not as concerned, but I haven't talked to him recently because that may have changed. But he said that people in his group, of Spanish speakers, because that's what I have seen here. I used to work for the college and in the English as a second language program in the 1990s. And the people that are Latino Spanish speakers, as well as Asians here, tended to be very much in their own group. And I even see some of that, still to this day. But the concern that he brought, and even what you just said, which, it saddens me as much as it angers me that you have to deal with that you have to make a choice. You're not going to go in this community where you've lived safely, and you've been a business owner, right? Didn't you used to
Yeah.
own a video store in Sutherland for years?
For 9 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, for 9 years I did. I've never really worried about it before. I was born in Southern California. I moved to Oregon in 1978. So I've been here many, many years. I've been in Roseburg since 96. So, but just there was an example as I had posted on Facebook that rumor had it that ICE had been in town and was headed to Myrtle Creek. Could anybody verify that? And the amount of comments that were pro ICE and good, and we need them here, blah blah blah, and just some of the hateful things is ridiculous. So that might be a pretty good reason why they're looking here. I mean,
Well,
because
and it's
I was going to say, like the Indivisibles posts on Facebook, the comments some of them are just horrible. And I don't know whether they're bots or whether they're actual people, but there's a lot of really, really hateful stuff going on, and a lot of really, really pro ICE and pro Trump mentality still with the population here. So
And I've seen those exact same posts, Bill, and it is, it's hateful. It's fear mongering. I mean, it's like, where were you when, you saw Mr. Rogers or all this other things, where's the human niceties that we thought we would expect growing up? But it also lends credence to what Zach is saying. This is a sundown town, and it has been for quite a while. I mean, I can boast 4 generations of this place, and as much as I like my family lineage, this place is dark. It's dark and scary. You know what I mean? When you hear people talk about it, and it's like it's something that hasn't gone away. You know what I mean? And this ice problem has just brought it to the forefront of people's worst humanity. I mean, you can see people literally just taking shots at people because of the color of their skin, just like you're saying, just on Facebook for no other reason. Can you tell if they're bot or not? No, but it's vile, it's hateful, and it's like, wow. Would you want your grandchildren to base you off these comments, or your children's children? You know what I mean? Like it's ridiculous. Yeah, your hands up.
Yeah, I'm just gonna add something like it was kind of buried too because I kept bringing it up. I was part of the UHA survey 2 years ago in 2024, and it identified a key piece of information that was 7 in 10 people of color that identify as BIPOC do not feel comfortable in Douglas County. Julia, with the rise of the Willamette and Umpqua Valley, did a similar survey. Different dynamic, trying to gather different information, but the same piece of information came out. And I'm just imagining with what Bill just said, what does a person of color think in this community? Are they all as fearful? And if so, how do we educate our community that this is not acceptable? Like maybe we just need to start a campaign when we see those comments. I'm blocking them, hiding them, calling them out, retaliating and finding if that person's a real human. I'm finding that when you go into their profile, there's nothing there. It's just a bot. There is no pictures, there's no person, there's no information on a majority of them. And so that's a harder to do, but maybe we just start researching every single negative comment and then retaliating by calling their work employer. Because if they're employed by a national organization, they're going to get fired. Because the organization itself does have typically like Kmart or Sears or Walmart, Costco, they all have a policy. And if you break that policy, you will get removed from your position. So maybe we just need to start, down the road. It's like, hey, this is not acceptable. See if there is actually some contact information in there of identifying that this person's indeed from Roseburg. Snap a picture of that comment, send it to their boss. And at least they'll know they have a bigot working for them. But I think, we have to do something and we need to educate our community. But I just think we have some data because UHA published that survey because it determines for the next 5 years how they, determine the health. And, Juliet's been using that information just to kind of like grow her organization and grow the collaborative that she's pulling together. But I said enough. Oh, that's it.
Tina, your hands up if you have something to add in.
Yeah, I want to start by saying, Bill, that was huge, you being vulnerable, and it shouldn't, I appreciate it, but I think that one way we can help as folks that are not as targeted and is to make ourselves more vulnerable. I outed myself as intersex and having 2 X's a Y on Facebook. I lost 10 friends. These were friends that could potentially target me and my family. And I think the vulnerability and showing that there are more of us that can also help and make it not so targeted on folks that they're targeting right now. If we show all of our vulnerabilities, maybe they won't focus on people that ICE is looking for. and come together as a community. That's my thought.
I'm going to probably remind people of this from time to time. Reverend Johnson, Howard Johnson, he had Bethany Baptist Church, right? When the year before, it might have been the year he passed away or the year before, the Democratic Party had for Black History Month, a forum at the library. And there were, a number of folks who were um, Latino. There were some Black people who were there, as Reverend Johnson was. And one of the things that he was actually the keynote speaker for the Flagel Dinner for the Democrats a few months before that, um, because he told me a story when I first met him about how he had lived here since the 1980s. He worked for D.R. Johnson Lumber. He was the comptroller. So, and he was, started the Bethany Baptist Church. And he said that he would have to tell his children and his grandchildren how to behave when they went out in public in Douglas County. He would tell them what they would have to do. And so he'd say, do this little lecture of what I have to have my children. And I'm sure that all of us know what that was. But what I found so profound about it at the Flagel dinner when he told it, because I asked him, to tell that speech, that the look on all the white people's face in the room, as if this was news to them. I mean, seriously, that most people didn't really realize that perspective of a person of color in Douglas County, because we are so insulated by this almost monoculture, and all of Oregon has that problem, but we specifically seem to have it. And the people in the audience who were people of color all raised the same concerns, right? That they felt discrimination. Some people who had moved here recently were wondering why in the hell were they here, and I wouldn't be surprised if some of them haven't left since then. So I think the education is for ourselves, really, and not even just the redneck Trumpers that we might think are racist, but I think we are not really aware enough of what it's like not to be white in Douglas County. Anybody else have comment? Want to say something?
I just put in a quote by Benjamin Franklin. Those who would give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety.
Mhm.
In the Patriot Act, when the Patriot Act came down, we actually had bookmarks that we were handing out that said you actually used that Benjamin Franklin quote. So it's actually very apropos to be in this context. One of the things that concerns me as a leftist is I do see this as a harbinger, not just for picking on people of color and homeless, which they also pick on homeless, right? And they're making plans to round them up. So maybe, they need this facility for um immigrants and homeless people. But he's also named political enemies, right? And not just leftists who have been persecuted in this country before, the McCarthy era, in case anybody hasn't read history. Um, there's others, but the most recent one, I think, of its magnitude was the McCarthy era. Um, and that is a real possibility for people who have it, but I think that the courage comes from us speaking out. And I do think, Tina, that it's a really good point of, putting out different, and I'll tell you, that may sound silly, but when I tell people I'm a leftist, or even say, yeah, you can call me a communist or socialist if that helps you figure out what that means. People are like dumbstruck, okay? It's like, and I remember talking about red diaper babies, and folks here may not know what that is, but that means that your parents were communists. Okay. So I was, a red diaper baby. And people don't know those terms, right? So we don't even have conversations about people who have very progressive ideas and want systemic social change. So I think that all of us are potentially threatened by this. And it would be a good place to round up us, right? In an ICE detention facility in Douglas County. And I only laugh all the time because it's like I feel like I'm in some kind of, dystopian, sci-fi movie. That's our life. Lori.
Yeah, I agree. It's just really intense and dystopian. Within this last week, I don't follow Truth Social, but somebody who posted a Truth Social from Trump was like, he related that Democrats were terrorists and public enemy number one behind Iran. I mean, that's real. And so it is and also he was gonna when he was sending people to South America, like he was like send people with mental illness down there too. So I think it's pretty much they're picking up Americans without due process too. And they're
Right.
landing in these facilities for a while, up to 72 hours at least, and not able to contact anybody. So there's a lot of not due process, a lot of people disappearing, a lot of people not accounted for, being flown around all these different places. So there's a lot to it going on, and it's very unprecedented. I know that that we had these kinds of things, going on in these facilities in previous administrations, but not to this level of paramilitary and encampment, internment in camps kind of situations.
Well, I hate to break it to you as the historian in the room.
Well, I mean,
It's
the
quite
Japanese, we
president.
have like a setting in UVA, but like I know that it's been happening, but like flying people to the I forgot the name of the facility that they were flying them and paid $5 million to the guy down in
ECOT in El
ECOT.
Salvador.
Thank you. Yeah,
Yes.
that. It's pretty severe stuff right there, unless I just don't know. And please share, Zach. I love your wisdom. I'm just like, there's a lot to know, and I'm not saying I know it all. I'm just bringing it up.
And the model for the model for this was the origins of the state of Oregon in genocide and the reservation system of indigenous people.
Yeah, that's horrible too.
In paramilitary groups in Southern Oregon that were nicknamed the Exterminators and flew that word on a flag and marched up and down Southern Oregon and killed every Indian they could possibly find. 1850s. This is
That's not long
this
ago.
is what is I wouldn't use the word unprecedented at all.
Well, I guess maybe more in our time, like what we're like colonialism and all of that, but just and the indigenous people are disappearing and still disappearing. It's still going on, like on that level, and we have the history and all that. So I'm not meaning to diminish the tragedies of that. So thank you for bringing that up. If I don't mean to be insensitive to that, just unprecedented in the way that we have paramilitary and our society, the way it is built now, and the way the world is now, and the way ICE looks now.
Yes, yeah. Like the history does not repeat itself. Certainly does not repeat itself, but it does rhyme. So the saying goes.
Okay.
Yes, there's novelty, of course, to the appearance of the paramilitaries that exist in the United States today, namely ICE, to the concentration camps that are being built, to the offshore prisons that people are being deported into, the mass deportations All these things have happened in the past. In the forms, the particular forms that they're taking now, yes, it's novel. Not unprecedented, though. These are new techniques and new tools that are used to do violence, as has been typical in the United States since and before its foundation.
New tools like gas, tear gas that's illegal and crimes against humanity we're using. Like we just kind of think we get to a certain place in society and that we're kind of changing and not going there. And it's just a shocker that we're here and now doing this.
Dane.
I was thinking, like, even in this format, like there is the Umpqua Valley BIPOC group. There's Elaine Rodriguez, and there's also, I know that NAACP was going to start a chapter for Southern, a collaborative one for like Coos Curry and Douglas County, but they do have a pretty strong presence in Lane County. Could we offer to be a format to like, how do we help you? How do we support you? How do we break this that's going on? But maybe that was a way, like seeing if they were interested in bringing their group to this group. We're a safe organization, but I think, how do we help support them in this day and age? But I think there's some really good groups. Maybe we could offer them a platform here and then find out how we can help them get some community education out there. Like if their stories are like Bill's story, we need to tell those stories. And we do know a majority of America are good-hearted people. There are just some, mean humans out there. But and I think our racism, it's here, but it's under the radar. When I went to Detroit the first time and I learned that there was a black side of the street and a white side of the street, and when I went to college and there was a black table where black people sat, it appalled me. And it appalled all of us. Like, we were like, what the hell is this shit? And I just, and that's when I first saw racism. And then you go down south. I mean, the South can just burn away. And in all my honesty, like my mom would have to like discuss with us the N word as we traveled back, because we were just like so appalled hearing people use that. But I mean, I know the racism's here, but when you live in places that it's so much more in your face and you hear those words and you hear, I mean, that was just, but this racism is just as bad, because it's kind of like under the radar and they say one thing, but then behind the, what they truly feel is, but now it's becoming more and more acceptable to be a racist again. And that's what's scary.
Yeah.
We're seeing what, it happens in the East here now. And that didn't always happen to be the case. It was more like something somebody didn't broadcast that you're a racist bigot. But now people are being a racist bigot.
But they get to own the word conservative. So like on a News and Review article that just came out about me running for commissioner and looking forward for the future, which was a great headline. People were like, oh no liberal people. And so somebody was like, what is the article screaming liberal about that, And it was like, that's okay. I want a conservative voice. And I think like these words are kind of used to kind of do the cloaking part of it, that there's these hidden rules of what these words are really meaning. And I just put, and they said they wanted a conservative voice, and I say I have a reasonable voice. So that's how I countered that. But just, I think that we need to call that out. Like there's a lot of identity politics coming out. And I think that that a lot of it is flying under the radar of conservative voice, and I get it that that's a way that we kind of say we lean certain ways, but I also think that it's one of those words that they're also using as a way to cloak under racism and shallow uh, mindsets.
Well, me and
So-
Betsy have had this discussion in the back. I'm sorry, did I cut somebody else off?
No,
Oh,
I
was
was going to say
go ahead.
something. I can't figure out how to raise my hand because I'm blind, so I'm not seeing the little
Oh, please, please,
things at the
please, Ruby.
bottom.
Just speak up, Ruth.
Okay, so one of the things that I discovered quite by accident was because I had traveled to a forum in, I think we were in Kansas at the time, and I was with Neighbor Works Umpqua, and we were doing a training, and some folks came in to talk to us about some data that they had collected worldwide about when you're in poverty and you are under stress, you end up losing, your IQ ends up dropping, and you really do become, um, I don't want to say dumber, but you just can't function. And
I'd say.
yeah, and so a lot of folks that were in the audience, and it really pertained to the Black and brown communities, that when there is so much stress and they are being harmed racially and all of these other ways. And this wasn't just in the United States, this was worldwide, where they had done this worldwide um, experiment, and they were working on all of this information. The whole program went completely sideways because a few of the BIPOC community said, because these women who were doing the study were white. And so the BIPOC community got really upset because they had white women telling them how they felt. And it was like, coming from here, from our little Podunkville, we don't experience what the rest of the world is, that the rest of the BIPOC community has been experiencing all their lives. And so what we have here is really what we learn about the culture of BIPOC is on television. And so our ignorance has really made us really ignorant, and we're not aware of the norms. And so sharing that information with the table that I was at, because we have such a limited view and a limited experience, our ignorance is our ignorance. And we have to figure out how to educate our community in a way that is not going to um, create making us go sideways, because it went sideways. It totally derailed the whole program for 3 days.
Yeah.
So they realized that they had a lot of work that they still had to do, and so it totally they had to reorganize everything. So it was a really enlightening thing, but at the same time, I was terrified to speak up, because anything I said, I really didn't have it. What I felt, I didn't have any value because I didn't have the experience that they were living in. But what my experience was the ignorance.
What the harm is you talk about it, is the thing that I see, that people don't get what institutional racism is. They just say, oh, well, I have friends, but they don't get how liberal or progressive you think you are when you're
Right.
white and you live in white privilege, whether you get it or not. Even when you're poor,
Right.
you're still white, right? So we still haven't overcome that. And so this is why I think that no offense to everybody in the crowd at that Flagel dinner when Reverend Johnson was talking, but I think this is why they were kind of shocked having to deal with their own racism, right? That they really you know, that's just created because we live in this, you know, hugely populated, well, you know, white community. And I think that one thing we can't appreciate, having lived in a gentrifying barrio before I moved here, that was right next to a ghettoized downtown Long Beach, and did a lot of community organizing, particularly about landlord tenant and getting to know people, various people, that it's very different to be Black or Latino in Long Beach, California, than it is to be Black and Latino in Douglas County. Okay, huge amount of difference. And so, and I think that that's one thing that pained me about what Reverend Johnson had said, is that reality is that he, as accomplished as he was, had to modify his behavior when he walked into the streets of Douglas County, when he drove a car in Douglas County. He even told me that he would have a suit jacket in the back seat of his car in order to put it on if he was going to be pulled over. He said he would also have, because he was a minister, would have his collar. That would also help protect him. He should not have to have been this, you know, live this way. And this is, he was, you know, experiencing this or still believing this was a problem a few years ago. And I have had friends who are both Latino and Black, one of whom who moved up to Seattle around the time we moved up to here. And they called me and he said, "Why in the hell did you move there? You know what's wrong? You know where Douglas County is?" He goes, "They had the Klan." Okay. And I said, "Well, they are white." But
Well, and
I
just like you're saying, Betsy, I can attest that I live under the cloud of privilege, so I haven't had to experience this stuff myself. But even in the traps of Archie Creek, when you know we should all come together as a community. I remember there was a family who, you know, it was a big deal because they went to the Atom, or they went to 138 Grill and came back to their campsite where they were hunkered down after the evacuations, and they found a noose there. And I mean, and it was a big deal. You know, it's still alive in our area.
It's true. And there was that report, yes, of that person that at um near their house that they found one not too long ago. That was probably about 5 years ago. That's a good point. So
Tommy went and cut that one down, I think. My husband.
yeah.
Yeah. There was a news that, and Tom went and cut it down. Yeah, we were extremely upset about that.
Yeah.
Well, that's one way that you can help support people. Absolutely. And the other thing is, I think, Dane, you brought a really good point, is we need to reach out to people in the BIPOC community and, you know, other people that, and just the general community, to let people know that we have, you know, that we will help people. I think at one point, you know, we could run a campaign. We did start, and I put together quickly a petition that was at the spring fair at the Democratic Party booth the last couple of days. There's a change.org petition with the same language on it. And so and I did a couple of flyers. One is a little half sheet flyer, and the other one's a full page flyer. The half sheet, they have, both of them have a QR code to the online change position. So if we can, and this is specifically about the potential of ICE being here, you know, and honestly, it's not an official legal petition. Those have to go through the Secretary of State or the state, you know, they have to go through the city or county, depending on where it's done. But these are informal petitions that people have used forever to just, instead of having people write letters, you know, to get the volume of number, because if you found your spam folder, Ruth, or somebody dug it out. And by the way, if it went to spam, somebody's probably responsible for digging it out because it's a public record, whether it's a can letter or not. But you know, it's numbers, right? You know, if thousands of people submit, you know, sign a petition, it's numbers. And yeah, sure, it's great to go and individually speak at meetings and even write individual letters. But even as we talked, I think last week, over this Forest BLM checkerboard issue, you know, just write and say, no, we don't want it, right? You know, that at least says, because the old belief is that if you write a letter, you're probably more likely to vote than not.
Right.
If you,
So-
you know,
just on the petition, Tommy and I took the petition to the protest, and we gathered 108 signatures, and we probably needed about 10 more people there to gather the signatures because we ran out of time. I mean, we started like at right at noon, and I think we had, between the two of us, we had two people say no, and every single person that we approached wanted to sign it. So there is definite support. It's a matter of, we just need more people on the ground to be doing it next time. So just a heads up. But that's why, and we gave out a lot of the QR codes and said, please share this to your Facebook page and try and get it out to as many people as possible. So
I'm sorry I failed you, Ruth and Betsy. We should have coordinated better, like having a little quick meeting at the beginning. I showed up at 10:30 and I could have helped because I was doing that with like the business cards for Indivisible and also the No Kings. I was handing those out and explaining, and I should have been collecting the signature too because I was kind of talking to everybody in my security role. But next time, most definitely. But we are one of the few agencies that we all did Arctic training, and it is amazing. It is, but every year we do a BIPOC training for our agency, and we did as a management group. We did me and my white supremacy over 10 weeks. It was great. But I think that's one thing we need to, like, I told Arctic's leadership, I said, we need you down here. We always get them up to Portland to do this, or we go to Eugene, which are, we need to come down. We need you down here. And I'm like, because, and we do have some strong groups like Jaden over on the coast with South Coast Equity. They have really done a good job. They are all people of color in that organization. And I mean, imagine Douglas County, go to Coos and Curry, and it probably like upscales racism 10 to 20%, especially in Curry. So I just think, we need to encourage change with organizations too. Like if organizations aren't, like the city of Roseburg, city council should do some sort of racism training for the city council. The county employees should all be going through racism training. And I know it's not, it's DEI, but we need that. Like UHA should be doing that. If they're not doing it, we should, if anybody's on their community action group, should encourage, like, hey, we want to promote having UHA do a BIPOC training, and there's some good ones out there. But I really like Arctic. I've gone through several 2-day trainings with that team, and they're just amazing. Anyways, I'll shut up.
I think that the point is we do need to listen. We need to listen to people who are in that have lived experience with this. And we can't, it is pretty arrogant for us to assume we know without getting input from people who actually do know. And I have actually talked with Angel to for one of the BIPOC groups, and did offer, I just need to follow up with them about coming here before all this happened, but actually coming here. And I did reach out when we did this to send them information. But so I think it is something that we should give a platform for, to help inform people about things. We did and we've had Julian on here who was working on the Palestinian issue, right? So he actually shared stuff regarding the war in Gaza months ago with us. So we are certainly willing to have anybody come and talk about these issues, and particularly their personal experience. I think that the more that people share exactly how this impacts their lives, But one of the thing, a couple of things I really didn't, highlight, we all appreciate the violation of our constitutional rights. This stuff is happening, right? These people, this is one of the scariest things for all of us is, and for somebody like me who tried to believe in the rule of law to some degree in the United States, this, kind of eliminates that fantasy, right? That just because you have laws, the people will automatically follow them. And we can all see how challenging that is when cases have to go months and months and months and up to the Supreme Court. Think of all the things this administration has been able to do while waiting for a court decision that overturns what he did, right? And so, how do you really unravel tariffs, right? Is a big glaring example, but there's been many of them. I mean, there's been hundreds of cases filed since he took office, what, a year and 2 months ago? And most of them have been ruled against him. But so it's a clear example of our rule of law. And to Zach's point about we need to look at our systemic change, but we have to try to figure out what we're going to try to do right now, and that's the rub, because I think he's absolutely right. We've had the kind of experience that we can, break the fantasy about, America's great ever. So I want to, there are people that America's never been great for. We all know that, right? Ever. There's a wonderful Langston Hughes poem that talks about America was never America for me. And so, it's a wonderful, wonderful poem. If you haven't read it, Google it, because, yeah, he was a great poet. But the Fourth Amendment right, our due process rights, a lack of the training and accountability these people have, because not only are they, told, I guess, to ignore laws, they're also abusing people physically. I mean, they're also, doing shit up to death. So, it is a thing that I don't see that benefits Douglas County. And unfortunately, how do we get that message out? And I don't know that I know the answer. But the other thing is just a pragmatic thing that I would think even the timber industries, and I think you raised this earlier in the chat about wine growers. Yeah, there's a wine growers association. There's a wine industry, and who heavily relies upon immigrant labor? The timber industry, man, we do everything to kiss the ass of the timber industry, right? So, what does the timber industry say to that? So that would be a good thing. So, I personally know people who work for companies that use a lot of migrant labor for timber. My son-in-law that I mentioned, who's half Mexican, his father was an undocumented worker here initially. And when he passed away several years ago, he worked for the Henry family, but on the ranch. He became, legal citizen. I don't know if he ever became a citizen, but he was eventually he had a green card, and he was in the agricultural work. That's what brought him up to Oregon. And so, how many people just think of our food here that is probably picked by somebody who is an immigrant? And I would suspect those are the people doing the wines. I have worked on a farm for a short while when I was young, and that's hard work. And I don't think anybody who thinks, people who do that work are lazy, I think you need to try it. Try, crawling on your hands and knees to pick cantaloupe, right? Because this shit doesn't happen by, just, it's not elevated usually. Stoop labor for a reason.
Strawberries. I would hate to be a strawberry picker.
Oh yeah, those are worse because you have to filter through the strawberries. Oh my God, yeah, they are. So, but we have industries here that rely upon immigrants to come here. So, what are the economic consequences of having ICE presence here? I don't see that would make people who might normally be part of that labor force want to be here at all. And then the infrastructure, how is this going to impact the general infrastructure and even cost to cities that we're not even aware of? Cost to cities. And Ruth raised a good thing about, do we have motel space? If it's actually just staff, do we really believe that's going to be Douglas County staff? Where's the housing? We have a housing crisis at the worker and below level already. So I don't think this is well thought out. Certainly I'm not sure that the current federal administration gives a shit. But I think there's a lot of consequences that people aren't even considering. Lori?
You're muted, Lori.
When you say immigrant, and a lot of people just go straight to they all need to go, or ICE is just, arresting them. But they're arresting people that are in the finalization stages, right in the courthouse, and they're just ready to they're doing the right things and to become, do the due process of becoming citizens. And so I think on top of kind of coming out and sharing the outliers or your personal stories, to kind of break some of those stigmas, which it does work, but it actually can be hurtful to people when they come and share their stories and you're outed. It can hurt your job, or there's the backlash that can happen too. So when people do come out, they're being very brave. Like Bill's very brave tonight coming online here and beyond on the internet. But to the whole point of us talking about the wineries and people, the immigrants, maybe working in the fields, people immediately go, okay, whatever, let ICE arrest this. Some people that are supportive of that are like, okay, whatever, let them arrest. They're criminals. They just go straight to that in their brain without registering all the injustices that have happened to people that are doing the process and paying billions of dollars being wiped out, and all the fees that they've been paying to do the process and all along the way. And that's the hard part, is people kind of being ignorant about that they have papers and green cards and they are in the process and they're still getting arrested.
Zach?
I need to stress that valorizing immigrant labor is not the move here. When we say things like immigrants are doing, they're doing agricultural work, they're working in the slaughterhouses, they're doing work that nobody else is doing or wants to do, ignores why immigrants like that are here in the first place. Why so many people have sought asylum or have entered the country otherwise. Why in the first place? Generally, it's the U.S. support for dictatorships, the sanctions and blockades of states that are developed through popular governance, particularly in South America and Central America. This whole population in the United States is created by the federal government through military and market interventions around the world, through imperial interventions. So I think we should not get hung up on saying, well, immigrants are doing important work. Yes, factually, the domestic U.S. economy, not just the domestic U.S. economy, the U.S. market industry does rely on immigrant labor, but it relies on immigrant labor in the same way that the United States in the antebellum period, the early 19th century, relied on slave labor. We shouldn't valorize that. I think that if we want to think of a ethical future for the United States, it will entail the elimination of unfree labor. And that means not simply saying that we shouldn't kick people out because they're doing this necessary labor, but actually allowing immigrants to be legitimate members of our communities, to be participating members of our communities, not third, fourth class residents of our communities. They're our neighbors. At this point, they are our neighbors. And they're not, whether they're workers or not, they are our neighbors. I also want to add something that's actually relevant to research that I've been doing. For those who don't know, I've been researching the New Odessa community, which was in the Glendale, Oregon area in the 1880s, and what happened to the members of that community afterward. One of their leading members, a man by the name of Paul Kaplan, who I've presented on about a year ago on an old Zoom call. Probably the thing that he was most well known for in his later years was protecting the right to political asylum in the United States. His key work was assuring that refugees, particularly Russian and Jewish refugees from the then Russian Empire, this is during early 20th century, like up through the First World War, protecting their ability to come to the United States to seek security and safety. And that meant two things. One, legally, through our political institutions, securing that right to political asylum. And secondly, curtailing, on the domestic front, mobs of reactionaries who wanted to kill these immigrants. The battle is the same to a strong degree. But I want to stress that those who have fought for those things, for those rights, I suppose, for those basic freedoms that everybody should be offered, the right to a safe, healthy existence, the right to well-being, the right to life. People in Douglas County have fought for that in the past. Minorities of Douglas County, certainly. But that is in our history. And it's upon us to carry on that tradition, I suppose.
I love everything you just said, Zach. It was so nicely put. Thank you. All the things tonight, in all the ways. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't disagree with what you're saying, Zach. My background, I think it says resist. One of them I have it says resist, defend and rebuild, because I think that this is really what does need to happen. And I'm not trying to glorify exploiting any worker in the field or in the forest, but it is the kind of language that we're looking at convincing people in the community, that when we are a money-focused society, the value of somebody is often equated to, what they produce for the rest of us. And so, but I think that it opens, the absolute right discussion about, exploiting people to get our food. But the reality is, I don't know that most American US citizens born here, they're not Americans because we have a really big America. It's called North and South America, right? But I don't know most people that would do that labor, having even just a short stint of it when I was young and a lot more able to do it. It's like, oh, hell no. And, frankly, that's, we have to appreciate, I think they should be paid a hell of a lot more money for willing to do that. And they need all the protections and they need to be fitting in with society as our next door neighbors. I absolutely agree. And and I do agree with the open door ideology that why do we have these artificial borders anyway? That in a society that as it moves forward, that really should be an ability to not have to have that. I don't necessarily support any immigration laws personally, so um, but I'm also older and practical at this point in my life and looking at what can we do right now to address this problem here in Roseburg on this little microcosm. Can we be better and appreciate, all those laborers more? Yeah.
Well, there's another aspect of this problem beyond the valorization, because we can still recognize, yes, um, an immigrant working in a field is our neighbor, and who among the locally born, particularly white or so-called middle class populations would do that labor. But what is that labor? In most cases, we're talking about cash crop farms. We're talking about not just labor, we're talking about toil, about people slaving away in like 100-degree weather in certain seasons. I worked on the Norris Blueberry Farm some years ago, and I remember the days when people were still working out picking blueberries in the fields over 100 degrees, sweat and all. Um, that's a life. These are often life-threatening conditions. People die of heat strokes in these kinds of conditions, among other things. Exhaustion and also the nature of a lot of this work will shorten people's lifespans. Um, why do we have these kinds of labor, especially these kinds of labor, cash crop farming on massive industrial scales that are not actually designed to feed people, but are basically designed for profit to compete in a market. Feeding people is secondary to that. That should also be called into question in this, because this becomes a matter of like local ways of life, local forms, local economy, um, and our priorities as a community. Like, do we want to grow uh, good, healthy food that everybody in the community has ready access to and is grown to suit the needs of the community? Or is our local industry local food growing largely for export for sale for the benefit of the few at the expense of the many? Like those kinds of questions do come into play in this issue of immigration, of the paramilitaries, because the paramilitaries, ICE, coming into town, is coming in to enforce the continuation of these forms of labor, of widespread toiling, of toil that does not have to be done, toil that serves mainly for the perpetuation of the violence itself, self-serving. I actually, speaking of Paul Kaplan, who came to Douglas County in the 1880s, a point that he stressed it was around like 1908 when masses of Russian Jews were fleeing the Russian Empire because they were being attacked by monarchist paramilitaries of mobs called the Black Hundreds that were rioting and killing people. He stressed that police forces and these violent apparatuses of the state, they only they serve to justify themselves. The words that I can only paraphrase. He said something along the lines of like a police force or a militarized force, an arm of the state, will instigate violence to bring about backlash to them so that they can suppress it. And that is how they justify their own existence. That's coming into play here in Oregon now very rapidly. And it's already existed to a great degree in policing systems from the state level down to the local level. But with a paramilitary force, there are no holds barred. And an organization like ICE, if it could be called an organization, it's more like a mob that's been given state sanction. These are not going to be beholden to any kind of laws, and in the backlash that they face, they will use this to justify their own existence very similarly. We can already see this because of we can already see this in the justifications used amidst the killing of two white folks in Minnesota. You know, they were trying to hit us with the car, or they were trying to shoot us with a gun, neither of which was the case. And that becomes the justification, so they say, of ICE's very existence.
Which is ultimately the reasons we should try to do whatever we can to not have them here in our neighborhood. And hopefully at some point be able to, accomplish some of those other things. One thing I want, the other thing that is out there on those flyers, there's a QR code for the change.org petition. There's also a round QR code that's for a group that we tried to launch about a year ago when the resist stuff came up, and there was some initial interest, but it kind of fizzled, called resist. So there's a form if people show interest that they want to start organizing to do follow-up. I also think we're going to probably end up having ROP, if I can arrange it for next Sunday, to come again, the Rural Organizing Project, Stephanie Hunter, to come again and speak about what kind of direct help they can give for helping our neighbors, making those connections. Specifically, one of the disadvantages that we have with the Spanish speaking community is I don't think we speak Spanish very well. I mean, my Spanish is extremely limited. So I think one of the things is identifying people in the community that can help with that and making outreach efforts. The other thing, Dane, that I didn't, I saw you listed groups, but the other thing is churches, and reaching out to local churches, might be a good idea. And some may not be very receptive, but sometimes, people surprise me. I also want to mention that next Friday, we are having Douglas County Commission candidates are going to be on our special elections stuff on Friday at 6 o'clock. They're going to discuss over the course of the next, I guess there's going to be 4 sessions before the election every other week, take on a topic. This first one is about land use, zoning, planning, those kinds of things. It kind of precipitated by the ONC checkerboard, land idea that's come out, as well as, the effort by the BLM, to try to restart old growth. So, and the issue then of housing and, the ability to have affordable housing. So there's a lot of issues around this land board and zoning. So, before we go, is there anybody else wants to say anything about the immigration stuff?
Well, I just wanted to bring up something else that was discussed at this Roseburg City Council meeting. It pertains to an issue that we've discussed, and that was the Fir Grove field. They discussed that at the meeting, and it sounds like they're moving forward on it, on getting grants and everything, which wasn't very encouraging news. Yep.
Yeah, I find these two things actually quite interrelated. And this may seem kind of far-fetched on a superficial level. How is the paving over of a local park, building a little fence around it and all that, fixing its use, how is that related to paramilitary activity coming to Roseburg? Both of these are part of a much broader general tendency that is a long-standing problem for historians and political theorists, sociologists, of the regimenting of life, of the subjecting of any community, big and small, to rigidity, to legibility, to measurement, and ultimately to improvement in the old sense of rendering something profitable by enclosing it and by enforcing that enclosure. I very much see that the tendency that brings forth even proposals to effectively eliminate the degrees of ecology in the city of Roseburg, exemplified by the park situation. I see that very much as a part, an expression of the same tendency toward the domination of all life that is also expressed by ICE paramilitary activity, controlling it to make it profitable.
Well, in the park situation, I've expressed this before. I think soccer should, go somewhere else, period. So the exclusive use of our commons by a minority is problematic for me in any way, shape, or form. And we tend to do that because the demand of that minority tends to be within that, white middle class, or let's just say middle class environment. And is problematic. Is who controls the dialogue of what's going to be used at the parks. And they're also the same people who tend to be the ones who control who sits on the city council, ergo then who sits in other arenas.
Well, the word privilege has been used throughout some of this conversation earlier. And I'm actually reminded of a very important historian who studied Douglas County, named Barbara Amy Breitmeyer Vader, who wrote a whole PhD dissertation on the early economy of Douglas County up until 1900. She wrote this back in like 1975. And one of her
Mm.
conclusions in this study, and she was reading like the newspapers and financial reports and company information, reading on the colonization and military occupation of Southern Oregon, the settlement of it, and the business interests of it. Her conclusion was that the settling population, by and large, was operating purely on a commercial basis. In contrast to those who they displaced, the pre-colonial societies that lived here, like, groups along the Umpqua, like the Adamitane, or in the Cow Creek Valley and the Rogue Valley further south of us, like the Tacoma, others. Unlike them, the commercial mindset and the engagement with other people and with the natural world for the sake of commercial activity was actually totally contradictory to the creation of community. And she argued that basically what was created in Douglas County was not a community, only a market. And so to the extent that we refer to this thing called the city of Roseburg, or the community of Roseburg, or the community of Douglas County, communities in Southern Oregon, we're actually not describing communities, potentially. We're describing markets. And to the extent that people relate to each other, they relate to each other primarily as interlocutors in economic exchange, of commodity exchange. But with that, too, another conclusion she came to was to the extent that there is a thing that could be called a community that is formed by the white settling population, it understands its own privileges as exclusive to itself and necessarily at the expense of others. The way that she put it was the white settling population that has established this, that has slaughtered the original inhabitants of this land, and that still maintain dominance over migrant workers who still in the late 19th century were a key part of the development of cities like Roseburg. And these were, what we would now call white immigrant workers, as well as Chinese immigrant workers and even Mexican immigrant workers and others who came in as a migrant labor force and could not afford to stay or had to find work elsewhere. Vatter's understanding was, to the extent that we could call this white settled population in cities like Roseburg a community, they understood themselves as having the right to live well, but to live well at the expense of other people. That was part of their right.
Zach, I think that would be a great topic for a show.
We should. Vatter's work is really interesting. And
no, I'd be interested, but and to go into the nuance, because I think that does have, kind of this movement towards looking at what the future really should be. How does that happen to, fix it? Because without really understanding, what has happened, why we are what we are, you probably know this better than I as a historian. How are we going to learn, from, for a better society? But I think it's a great idea. But
How do you, oh,
go ahead.
Sorry. How do you spell her name?
Barbara Amy Breitmeyer Vatter. She's a long name, but you could look up Barbara Vatter. That's Barbara. Barbara Vatter.
Yeah.
It's Vatter.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I know that you've shared some of this information before, because I actually think I did find her dissertation online and started to read part of it, if I'm not mistaken.
I off the top of my head, I'm remembering it's called Forest History of Douglas County.
Yeah.
But this is the kind of thing that we have to understand, and this is the kind of thing that foundationally links the paramilitary thing. Not just ICE, but the appearance of the Ku Klux Klan, the domination of Southern Oregon by the Ku Klux Klan in the 20s, and the melting of it into the basic political and social fabric of Southern Oregon. It links that with the destruction of the commons in such a thing as the Fir Grove Park turfing and fencing plan.
Yeah.
To say nothing
Well, I think
nothing of the ecological element of it. These are instances of that original colonial mindset coming into play once again because it is implicit in the DNA of our what we might call communities.
But it's our culture, and it's probably one of the reasons why they're trying to, wipe these historical recognitions of people and what happened. This is why they don't like DEI, right? They claim that they don't like that, and they're trying to whitewash history.
Well, so Lori mentioned something in the chat here, transactional relationships. I want
Yeah.
to stress that more than thinking of this in terms of transaction, importantly, transaction or the trade or bartering, which is a very recent thing historically. These kinds of exchanges and relations with others are not just interchanges between equals. These are always done in hierarchical relations as we've known them. There's somebody in a transactional relationship who has more than somebody else, and that gives them a distinct advantage and coercive power over others. And so, beyond just thinking of that as thinking of these things as transactional relationships, and our origins being based in transactional relationships, no, I actually think it's better to understand these as hierarchical relationships. So it's not, having a privilege at the expense of others, as Vader argues, is the basis for what we now know as Douglas County. That is establishing a hierarchy. Certain people are superior to others. That's the basic understanding. So any kinds of transactions, whether it's business contracts or hiring labor and all that, that is done with respect to maintaining the hierarchy of not just the white settled population, but specifically the propertied white settled population that has dominated this region since the 1840s.
Yeah, and
That
actually,
like the oldest of the old boys club.
yeah, it's actually a fallacy that you see in contract law, is that there's an assumption. So our whole legal system in civil litigation is it's contract is equal parties, right? And that is a fallacy. So that's another topic we could have at some time in the future. But we're gonna move. Does anybody else have any announcement or anything they want to say that can't wait till next time?
See y'all Tuesday night at the Attorney General of Oregon, and I hope to see y'all there. I printed some of those petitions. I'm bringing some of them, so I'm going to get signatures.
Yeah, cool.
Thank you, Betsy, for doing that, and thank you, Ruth, for doing that. But have a great night, everybody.
All right, are we done?
Have a great night, everybody.
Till next time.
Yeah.